Hello, and welcome back to the Nontraditional Nurse podcast. I'm Ellie, and today I'm talking with Teri Crumb, who's a clinical research nurse with more than 20 years of experience and now runs her own consulting business. So, Teri, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, I'm really excited for this conversation because I think it's going to bring a lot of clarity to what a clinical research nurse role might look like. And I know our listeners have been really interested in that. So, let's dive right in. So you've spent over 2 decades in clinical research nursing, and now you're doing it independently through your own LLC. Can you kind of take us back to the beginning and just talk about what first drew you towards clinical research and how that transition looked from bedside nursing?
Yeah, so I actually moved from the floor, as we all lovingly call it, to the outpatient clinic first. So it was while I was working as an outpatient clinic nurse um, that I heard about research. So I made that transition from the floor over to the clinic because I found out they had no weekends and no holidays. And I absolutely knew that was the direction I wanted for myself because wanted that work-life balance. So in the clinic, our team was approached about conducting a clinical trial, and it was collecting a urine sample from newborn babies. And I was kind of intrigued. So I actually worked to offer. I was at that time, I had started a family. I was working part time. So I offered to work an extra day to help consent patients into the study. And that's when I got really introduced to the research staff, and the next thing you knew, they had an open position and I was asked to apply. And I will tell you, I was really hesitant at first. So ultimately, I decided to shadow someone. So I shadowed one of the other research nurses, again, on a day off, but just to kind of follow her around, kind of get a feel for what they did. I then applied, interviewed, and literally, I walked in the door from the interview at home and the phone rang and, they were calling me with an offer. And to be very truthful, I did not know at the time that this would be my forever role. Because learning this research language was a big step. But I think what's kept me in it so long is because I truly use nursing skills every day. It's just I use them in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the shadow shift. I feel like that is like one of the most powerful things you can do if you're really not sure if you want to take that step or not. So for nurses who might have only heard the term clinical research nurse kind of in passing, how would you describe what that role actually might involve?
Yeah, to be really honest with you, Ellie, I don't think many people have, they don't know what the term really is to be a clinical
Yeah,
research
that's
nurse.
true.
So, pretty much every day I have to explain to people what I do, and especially my own family. So essentially, clinical research roles honestly vary across the United States. So depending on the audience that's listening, different institutions, different sites have different roles. The most common job description is called, or position is called, a clinical research coordinator. Um, and this position can be held by someone from most any background. And a lot of people don't even have, if you can imagine, a clinical background that are in this role.
Wow.
But specifically, I was a clinical research nurse at my hospital. So that really combines your clinical expertise with research skills. So you basically support the conduct or the implementation of a research trial that involves people. So, as a nurse, I then would assess my patients, educate people that are going to be in that study. It's a project management, compliance. You're this communication liaison between a physician, an industry sponsor, the ethics board, and then, of course, the people that are in the study. I think the best way to describe my job, I would tell people all the time. Some days I was in scrubs, starting IVs, giving investigational drug, drawing blood, doing tons of charting. And then other days I was in business attire and I desk work and I was in meetings and I was giving tours around the hospital with, industry sponsors. So it's this balance of clinical, but then we always call them suit nurses. That was our
Yeah.
term. And it's a little bit of both. So it's just a combo.
Yeah, and you wear sounds like so many hats while doing it. I'm sure
Mhm.
there's a learning curve there. But what are some of your favorite parts of working in clinical research?
Um, I over the years, when you think about 20 years of working in research, I haven't just been in one area. I've always been a pediatric nurse, so I come at it from a peds perspective. But I did everything from hemonc to cystic fibrosis. I worked in the GI team, space, endocrine, a lot in nephrology, but I actually dabbled like in the lab and with pathology and so sprinkled sort of all different areas of the hospital throughout those 20 years. Um, and essentially, I think what I loved the most was getting to meet with families for a whole different reason. Um, I think the most intriguing part was knowing we were pushing science forward and you were looking at potential therapies, that were being studied that would be able to offer hope or a future for kids with disease. I think one of the most poignant parts of being in research were following along as families were participating in the trial, and for the most part, a lot of studies you're blinded. You don't know if they're receiving active drug or placebo, because that's how
Yeah.
many trials are put together. And we had families coming in saying they were experiencing or seeing their child have big changes in their health and wellness. And of course, we were like, la 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 la, don't tell us that. But to see families realize their child was getting drug, I mean, it literally was moments that brought tears to not just my eyes, but our whole clinic staff. Um, so it's just been incredible to watch some of the miracle treatments that have come out from the research we've been doing.
That is so, so cool to hear. And yeah, I'm sure that would be hard to keep that to yourself when you're trying not to be biased in the
Right.
research.
Yeah, because 'cause you're supposed to stay blinded, but
Yeah,
but
right.
the families were giving us a whole lot of detail that we weren't
Yeah, so it's
expecting.
so exciting for them and life-changing, and I feel like you kinda just, touched on what my next question was because you use your nursing in such different ways, and I think a lot of nurses went into nursing and they love that, fulfillment and, feeling like you're having this impact for patients, so it sounds like you haven't left that behind at all, like, you still get to experience that?
Yeah, a lot of nurses do work at the bedside, and there's a lot of fulfillment you get out of that, but I think all of us have fulfillment in different ways. Some
Absolutely.
some nurses need that bedside interaction, and I still have friends that work on the floor, and they love it every single day, and, I enjoyed that to a certain extent, but for me, the days kinda were a blur. I just felt like I was doing the same thing again and again. Um, I think when I look back, I thought a lot about what this position now means to me and versus being at the bedside. My favorite clinical area was always the emergency department
Okay.
because why? You never I'm not an adrenaline junkie, as they always say, but I love that you never knew what was coming next. That was
Yeah.
so intellectually stimulating for me because I had to dig into my brain to come up the right assessment questions and you had to do it all on the fly. And I loved that intellectual stimulation. And that's what research does for me now. I'm always learning something new. 2 days are never the same. In fact, most of the time, even if I had a task list of what I was gonna do, it seemed like something always came off, the side and took out your whole day and you were doing something completely different. And after 20 years, I'm still learning and trying new things. So that's what I love about it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing and such an important message too because everyone does fill their cup in different ways, and, I meet a lot of nurses that love the bedside and still, wanna do that every day, and a lot of nurses that is not filling their cup any longer, and that's why they're looking at more non-traditional roles, and neither path is right nor wrong, and you can do nursing in the way that makes the most sense for you and really makes you happy, so I love that. Um So you talked about collaboration a little bit, and sounds like you're collaborating with a ton of different teams during the research process. So, what does that look like in practice, and how do nurses really help keep research both ethical and patient centered?
So working in research, it's a highly collaborative environment. So I would say for someone that doesn't like dealing with people on a regular basis, um, this is probably not an area for you. I usually feel like a research nurse is a bit like being an air traffic controller.
Okay.
We're literally, as the title of a clinical research coordinator, we are coordinating all aspects of this study. You kind of have um, so many people that you have to communicate with and align. It's a process, but you kind of have to get everybody in their set point working on their activities, and you're just that linchpin all the time. But I think, for the most part, when I think about my nursing education and my training, everything about nursing is that you focus on the patient first. And that's what research nurses do really well, is we make sure the focus is on the health and safety and well-being of the patient. Um, in that, everything we view with a research protocol is through that lens in making sure our patients' voices are heard. So to me, the two just go hand in hand because all of our research regulations, all those laws, federal regulations, at the heart of it are trying to keep patients safe and being ethical. And so I think nurses just hit it. We're
Yeah.
spot on with that with our education.
Yeah. Such an important part of the research team for sure. Now we talk about perks. It's always fun to talk about the things you love, but also I think it's really important when someone's looking at a new role. What are some of the biggest challenges that come to mind when you think about your time as a research nurse?
I think just what we started out saying, like, what is this role? There are so many people that don't understand or have never heard of your role, even within your own hospital. And that led to staff becoming, I would say, territorial, and not letting you work in their space. I actually had a study where I went to the bedside. The patient met all the criteria. I met with the family. They enrolled in the study. And so then I went to literally put the orders in for the study. I mean, we sort of had, standing orders, as you could call it, from the
Sure.
physician. And if you can imagine this, the staff would not allow me to write orders, even though they were standing orders, would not let me put those into their system because I was a total stranger to them, even though, I mean, I was an employee,
Yeah.
but actually blocked my work and called their manager on
Oh
me.
my
So,
goodness.
I mean, it was quite unexpected. I actually needed the lead physician of the study to come down and advocate for a research presence while we were there and to be allowed to do my job. And I think similarly along that lines, a lot of times, not just me, but my colleagues, um, really experience where hospital decisions, or you could say system decisions, don't don't even think about, oh, will this affect our research teams, or
Sure.
take into consideration the work that we're trying to do, and so they make broad sweeping changes that absolutely inhibit our role or change. I mean, we had pivotal decisions when I was working at a hospital, and it took us weeks to unbury ourselves for the types of decisions they made across the hospital because, again, they didn't take research into consideration. So, those are probably some very personal,
Yeah.
roadblocks, I could say, and then some very big system wide that, were frustrating, but it's still, you balance that out with how much you like the role and the difference you're making with families
Yeah, absolutely. And you probably just continue having to advocate for yourself and your team through every day.
every day.
Yep. So which bedside skills would you say have translated really well into your research and consulting work?
So at the top is patient advocacy. I'm always trying to be the voice of what would our patients think about this. and including the whole family in the decision-making process. I think, very early on as a floor nurse, I learned you have to chart everything, but I learned that tenfold in research. We kinda have a little quip about if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. So in the case of an audit, whether that's, just a audit by your own department of the research or help us all when the FDA comes and does an audit on site, that's the big stakes audit. Um, you can't prove anything if you didn't document it.
Sure.
So charting is everything in the research space. Um, and I would say, I do assessments and I educate families and patients about all kinds of things. When I was working at the hospital before I transitioned to being a consultant, I was teaching families about drugs, about side effects, how to give shots, all of the nursing basics that you do as part of your role, but I got to do it in the context of research. And then, of course, nursing is highly collaborative, doesn't really matter where you're working with all kinds of team members. And so that's the same in research is you're working with tons of other people and training new people. So all of those things, all of those nursing elements that we all experience in our various areas, you're bringing to the research space.
Yeah, what all those things you mentioned are things that almost any nurse that's worked at the bedside really has learned. So I love that for transferable skills. And I did want to just ask you, remote work I think is such a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
And could you kind of just talk to us a little bit about obviously you started your research journey and you're still in person doing a lot of in-person work, but where does remote work fit into the research space? And is it realistic to go from bedside to looking for remote clinical research work, or is a good stepping stone, to um, work for an institution, or how does that look? Because obviously you do your own work now for an LLC.
Yeah. It's hard to say. I kinda joke with people when I first started, branching out, leaving the hospital area, starting my own LLC. My employer, actually had approached me just prior to COVID, but they couldn't quite imagine someone being 100% remote. Like, they just thought that's probably not feasible. So they
Okay.
said, "Would you be willing to come, to their state, their office, um, like, at least a couple times a year?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I could do that, no problem." And then once COVID hit and we learned all of this technology, like, we meet on a regular basis. It's over Teams or Zoom or whatever platform. Um, it's hard to say if a nurse from the bedside could just jump into a remote role in research. I think there's positions that are out there, but I think many of them want you to get a little bit of research experience under your belt first. So if someone was truly interested, I think number one, talk to people, find out what they like about the job. I mean, I've already told you some of the things I like about the job. Um, but I think it's always good to hear what they love because, they might say, "Oh, I talk to people all day." And you're thinking, "Yeah, I don't like to talk to people all day,"
Yeah.
you know? Some people like, all the desk work, all of the writing, all, the other aspects of being a research nurse. And that may not be for you. So hearing from a few people in that role, I think is a good, I would say litmus test. Do you remember chemistry and doing
Yes.
litmus tests? um, so, read about the role more and then consider, I would say, starting a research role where you're on site engaging with patients. That way you're going to learn the language, the regulations, maybe even get certified. I think, a couple years of experience would be great if your eventual plan is to go remote, but nowadays, jobs are so creative that
Yeah.
I'm not saying that a remote job isn't out there, and I don't know that I would necessarily advocate for it either. I will say working completely remote in your own home, it's got its perks, but it also, can get a little lonely sometimes. You just don't have that, the colleagues to bounce around ideas, you can try to call them up on Teams or whatever, but, it can be a little lonely some days.
Yeah, the camaraderie, I think, is one of the biggest things in nursing that I think that shift into a remote role, it's kind of overlooked. You don't realize, like, most of your best friends you work with, at some point in the hospital. So that was a big shift for me as well. And I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, but I love it. My commute is literally across the hall,
Yeah.
and, we joke about how I basically fill my car up with gas now, like, maybe once a month, if
Yeah.
that, so
Right.
that part, and then I live in Michigan, so when it snows, I feel really bad for all you poor people that have to be driving out in, major snowstorms, and I just sit and watch it snow out my window.
Yes.
So again, there are some good things out there.
For sure. And how we kind of like to wrap up all of our interviews, and we may have touched on a few of these points, but for nurses listening who are curious about this path but really aren't sure where to start, what are some realistic entry points into the world of clinical research or first steps that you'd recommend for them?
So there are 2 professional organizations. I'm involved, you could say with both. I'm certified through ACRP. That's the Association of Clinical Research Professionals. Their website, it's acrpnet.org, I think. Um, they have a ton of information out there. I think they've got like some free videos and stuff that you can watch, listen to other nurses, articles that you can read. And then SOCRA, SOCRA, is another professional organization. Um, I will say SOCRA tends to have a bit more for nurses who are interested in clinical research, but both organizations equitably have a lot of great information where you can learn about the profession. And then we've already talked about if you get a chance to spend a few hours with a research nurse, I think that would be a great way to go, or interview one, ask a lot of questions, go to coffee. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, asking some of the things same things you talked to me about today. Find out what they love, but also find out, like, what's not so glamorous about the job. I think you gotta hear both to make your decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we talk about this a lot, but what you brought up, reaching out, cold outreach, it feels so weird, especially to nurses a lot of times. But I mean, it's the way we met on LinkedIn. People are willing to talk to you. Not everyone will answer your message, but kind of send messages out and see what sticks. And someone will get on the phone with you and give you some of this great advice. So we like to get your first networking call out of the way by doing this interview, but there's so many great people to talk to. So, Terry, thank you so much for sharing your experience. And I think you did a great job breaking down the world of clinical research nursing. So, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be a part of it.
And if today's conversation got you curious about this path or any non traditional role, make sure you're subscribed to the Nontraditional Nurse newsletter so you don't miss future interviews and career deep dives. And thank you all for listening. We will see you next time.